All right, we're live. Welcome to Dive into World Building. Today we are taking on a question that's going to be thorny, and it will be interesting. It's the question of who is valued in society and what that means, and I think there are different ways for people to be valued in a society, and one of the things that I would definitely want to make sure that we talk about is how we can tell what kind of value is placed on a person in society. Because sometimes it's not quite straightforward, and especially in the context of world building, we end up with a lot of different kinds of social systems and ways of organizing people, and not necessarily digging into the nuances of how people value each other and how they express that. Does that make sense? So we definitely have the question of royalty, and royalty seemed to come up a lot. I think I don't know. It may just be Americans. Americans appear to be fascinated with royalty.
Some/many Americans?
Sorry?
Some/many Americans.
Some/many Americans. Certain large swaths of cultural milieu in America appear to be
Disney princesses.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's the Disney princess, phenomenon.
I mean, we kicked out royalty back when we kicked out the British, and we've been kind of almost wishing we hadn't ever since.
I bet we're really wishing it right now.
Really? We want George back? Really?
No, we don't want George back.
We don't want George back. Come on.
But I think that the cultural subset who were part of kicking out George has maintained a certain wistfulness about the qualities they perceive in royalty. So
I think what's fair to say is that not everybody was on board with the most radical ends of the American Revolution. And some people really wanted to just kick George off the top so they would all rise up one level. Which is apparently is the is it John Adams who is one of the first set who only got one round in office, was terribly unpopular because he wanted to be addressed by things that were very clearly monarchic in their style, and that in the founding father age there was definitely a sense of, oh, you're one of those guys who you said you're one of us, but really you're a royalist loyalist.
And there were plenty of royalist loyalists, so
yeah, they didn't all go to Canada afterwards. A lot of them stayed put. But that goes on to a completely different topic.
Lowell's and God.
I think we cross-talk. Sorry, go, Kat.
Oh, I was saying, I think this is where we talk about Cabot's talk only to Lowell's and Lowell's talk only to God. Is that the way that one goes, or do I have it wrong? It's something
I'm not
like
familiar with that one.
It's a snarky little phrase about Boston Brahmin society where really they only think that each other are really good enough, but they secretly think the other one isn't quite as good as they are. I am angry.
That's interesting. Well, okay. So we don't have to stick with royalty though. So I guess it's useful before we move on from royalty though to say, how can we tell that Americans value royalty? Right? Well, there's Disney, there's merchandise.
Yeah.
There's tons and tons of storytelling. They're all kinds of stories about the rightful heir and the this, that, and the other.
Well, even when people claim native heritage that they don't have, it's always royalty. It's always princess or
so people like to claim nobility. So what? So okay. So as opposed to royalties, how do we distinguish nobles from royalty? Or nobility
from royalty. I think it's to use an old American parallel. Like it was once said that every U.S. senator thinks that because at the time was he could become president, and I think that's true of nobility. Every noble thinks that they have themselves to be a king, but they're not.
Well, so what is it that makes nobles nobles?
Historically?
No, not necessarily historically. I mean, yeah, historically would be useful.
Well, historically, it's because you had weapons and armor and able to exert control over a territory in a dark age, and so you wind up getting an inheritance and a feudal estate.
So
basically moving into a power vacuum and exerting authority, and that eventually becomes hereditary. And so at that point,
it means that just to clarify, it doesn't necessarily then mean that you have weapons and armor. It means that you are able to direct the behaviors of people who do have weapons and armor.
Yes, but in the traditional Dark Age, early Middle Age sense, you almost certainly strapped on armor yourself, because otherwise you're not seen as strong by those you would lead.
Oh, I see.
Michael, Elliot is coming. I am working right now. You cannot come do this.
Poor cat. Okay.
And so once you have a hereditary system, then nobles just kind of perpetuate themselves.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay.
So sorry.
So hereditary systems, yeah.
But wait, that's a very Eurocentric way of looking at how you end up with nobles. That's not necessarily the way.
It is very Western European. I should put that up front. You're absolutely right, Kat. I am unfortunately not as familiar with other systems of nobility to speak to them accurately or intelligently.
So I want to talk about two different things that sort of happen in many other places. One of which is that the ruling class comes from the people who are seen to have divine blessing of some sort.
Okay.
And so fortune favors. If you're fortunate, clearly you're blessed, and so therefore you should be given deference by people who aren't. Which is how we end up with prosperity gospel now. The other is that really, to differentiate from how do you become noble, how do you tell that somebody is part of that?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it really universally is, what do they get away with?
Oh, sure.
Except that when I said this in my own Facebook discussing this, I had some interesting pushback from people who are South Asian who said that people who are Savarna, who are not from the lowest castes, tend to view it that the quote highest castes actually have the most restrictions on their behavior, and that the lowest castes have the least. So that may not be the way that the population sees itself, who gets to do the most stuff and get away with it.
Yeah.
But it really comes down to who wields the effective power and this is all about who ends up with control of how prosperity is allocated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in every culture, there ends up being who allocates the prosperity and how are those people chosen, and it often ends up being hereditary, because who wants to see their kid have less than they do?
Mm-hmm.
So, and now we're ending up with a system where we're struggling, and we have lots of moments where we have fewer and fewer bits to spread out, and then things get toppled. Younger sons get sent away to revolution, and we end up with wars, or we end up saying no, all priests have to be celibate, or you just don't have hereditary anymore, or the peasants finally get really pissed off and everybody off of their heads. So it's a delicate balance of how well you allocate the prosperity, right? That's the noble game.
Yeah.
So the other thing that's interesting about who's respected in society is who gets to say who stays there and who doesn't.
Right.
Who gets to mete out the banishments? Who gets to say that person isn't one of us? And I think if you look at societies in flux, it happens because other people start saying, no, we don't like the way you've been deciding this, and we're going to change that.
Right.
And those are the moments when and in some cultures, you end up doing that very systematically, right? You have the one day or the set days of the year, of the days of misrule or carnival or whatever you call them, where servants get to pretend they're nobles and nobles are supposed to pretend they're servants. So I just learned about a festival in Japan during the Obon season, which is the summer season, which is when the Japanese culturally have communing with the dead kind of things going on. But there's a mass dance that happens in I'm blanking on the town right now, but apparently we know about the history of this festival because there are edicts saying that the samurai have to stay inside and they are not allowed to come out. Because apparently it had been such a disruptive thing to have them come out and also be carousing, so that somebody else placed an edict of the streets belong to the non-samurai on these days. And I'm sort of giving a rough story about this, but it's one of those cases of you can sometimes look at what the ordinary power balance is in a society by looking at the days that are set aside to subvert that.
Yeah.
I can keep talking.
No, it's fine. I'm slow today. I'm writing notes. So I think that we have this. So in my mind, I don't quite think that the alignment of cultural capital is quite the same. It's highly aligned, but it's not necessarily quite the same as like money capital. And so I think it's worth asking what other forms of value can be assigned to people besides just, well, we give them money, or these people monopolize money of particular types.
Well, if we go to Europe, we have the historical example of Jews specifically not being allowed to own land because land is power in that culture, and they are allowed monetary wealth, but not land wealth. And the issue of, again, who gets to stay, who gets to go, and defenses. And it's not a question of what can be bought and what can be sold. And I think then we get back to that Western European thing about feudalism, because that's a society based on how much land do you own and what do you have title to.
Yeah.
And so when you introduced the topic this week, the thing that I was thinking about was courtesans who have in that structure, and in every culture that they have this kind of role for women mostly, where they have a certain social prestige, but they don't have the power that comes with family and the power that comes with propriety and all the other roles, and the tension between having influence versus having security and power. And so when the spheres are divided like that, it becomes a really interesting show of, well, none of these things are actual real power because the power has been allotted and gendered and money and age and other ways.
Yep.
Yep. And I think you can even broaden that more from courtesans to just in patriarchal societies, just the role of women and how do they try to influence and direct events when they generally don't have, as designated by society, any formal power. I'm thinking of the role of women in the Roman Empire, which is mostly invisible except when they're trying to get power for or on behalf of their sons, their fathers, their husbands, but it's all very murky because it's theoretically they are the property of those people and they have the power of life and death over them. But people like, say, Servilia, who was the mistress of Julius Caesar, definitely had a strong influence on the events of the day, even though by law they really shouldn't have had that. But people try to find power however they can. You mentioned the Jews before in Western Europe during the Middle Ages. Women, anybody who doesn't have the formal power in a society will try to get power by some other means. It's just human nature, I think.
Well,
it's being able to control your own life, to have the power to control your own life is something that, it's human nature, but why would you not want that? What is the survival value in not wanting to control your own life?
Well, I'm not saying there is no survival value, but I'm saying that goes into more than just basic autonomy. I think power does eventually come to people who try to reach for more than that, even if they're not in the upper class, be it royalty, nobility, or whoever's in the power structure. There's a tendency for some people to grasp for power, even if they're not in a position to be born to it. If that's what I'm saying.
Well, okay, so I think we've got two different kinds of power that we're talking about here, because being able to control your own life and, say, for example, keep yourself from being starved or killed and that kind of thing, is different from wanting to have power over other people.
Yeah, there's also a difference between power and authority.
How are you defining the difference between power and authority?
Well, someone who is operating behind the scenes may have the power to get something done, but doesn't have the formal authority. They're not.
Oh, I see what you're talking about. It's more like whether
you're talking about kings versus kingmakers.
No, not just that, but I mean the people behind the desk behind the counter at the DMV. They have the authority to do paperwork, issue your driver's license and your registration and do your eye test and all that stuff. But they have an inordinate amount of power over your life because they can make those things harder or easier. And regardless of the authority that they have to do that, there's no way to there's no real way to stop them from exerting power they're not authorized to have. I mean, you can say, hey, I'm going to tell your boss, and so what? What's going to happen?
Well, okay, so
they've been granted power that that isn't spelled out. It's not explicit.
They're gatekeepers.
Yeah.
But well, I mean, I suppose in some respects we could be talking about whether you have a particular like publicly awarded title that explicitly gives you the power to change particular types of things, versus just being in a position where your ability to perform your function or not might allow you to function as a gatekeeper. Is that what you're talking
about?
If I may, I think this becomes clear if we don't try to separate from personal power and power over others, and we talk about sort of being able to measure power by how many people's lives can you affect, but also who can thwart you.
Yep.
And it's really a question of sort of breadth and depth, and also relative where you are in the stack. So also the ways in which checks and balances is supposed to subvert that. And the ways in which the traditional forms of checks and balances were things like the difference between the authority of the Pope versus the secular kings. And that if you believe that power derives from God and God is granted by God, then you have a whole thing where the issue is who has the power to take that away from you, and do you have any rivals? Can you be toppled? And the thing about the people of the DMV is that this is what unions and procedures and hierarchies and that moment of saying, no, I'm going to deny this to you, and yes, you can point to the rule books, but the supervisor's out to lunch and I'm just going to tell you to go away, which is I think what we're trying to get at here. But this is kind of getting I think we need to think about where that is compared to who was a recorded respect. And
yeah,
Julia, what is our theme this week?
Well, I just want to talk about different forms of value placed on people in society. Like, how does that express itself? I think we have different. See, I don't think we only have one type of value out there. I think we have several different kinds, and they may be related to one another on a fundamental level. But like, who gets admiration and why versus? Do you see my point? So money and admiration tend to go hand in hand a lot, but they don't necessarily. And I think of artists and their place in society and what value is placed on that, which varies widely depending on the society.
And there's I had this thing that was in my brain. People who are valued for function, for services they perform. People who are valued for the group that they're in, elders, or family members, or that's a little fuzzy.
Then there are things like celebrities.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just really throw out the problematic and exciting things here. When we talk about value, I think we need to be very careful about how we're defining value, because if we go back a couple hundred years, there are people who were assigned a monetary value because they weren't considered people.
Yeah.
So, we need to be careful when we say value. And also, I think that we have issues of whose children are considered more of a priority than other people's children, right?
Yep.
And the ways in which children or women or various other categories of people are assigned value to mean these people are protected by the powerful people, and the protection of those people becomes its own excuse for exertion of power.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think we want to look at how are we going to assess value.
That is exactly what we're trying to talk about. I wanted to make sure we were not just talking about one type of thing. So
how do you? And the problem is that in a lot of societies, monetary, well, all right, capitalism. Monetary value is placed on a human being, whether they're being thought of as property or not. They're the functions that they perform, the productive member of society thing, that is assigned a dollar amount. If you aren't doing something that somebody's willing to pay money for, you're not valuable. But you are, but you might be valuable to your parents, not because you produce anything, but because you're their child. That's, that is a different value, and that's not measurable.
I want to introduce the word cherished in here versus valued.
Okay.
Because if we talk about children being cherished, then it becomes a little clearer what we're talking about. I don't think that that's necessarily the way it's widely used, but I think that as a tool for this discussion, it helps sort out what we're talking about. And one of the really interesting things in every society is that we assign this gut work that's really, really important to the functioning of the community to people that we don't necessarily value. And so in all sorts of societies, we have people dealing with refuse. And because we find it distasteful, we tend to we do many, many different things in societies to shun them, to dismiss them, to marginalize them. But the truth is, in any kind of organized, large-scale society, if you don't have somebody dealing with refuse of all sorts, you're going to end up with a very, very sick community. And yet, these people are valuable in terms of importance and vital. These people are vital, but they're not valued.
Yep, they're not respected.
And so I think that these are the stories that we haven't necessarily been telling in genre fiction that are really interesting, because when we've been telling the stories of kings, we don't necessarily tell the stories of other people around them. And I think it was interesting when Tolkien is telling the story of hobbits, but I don't think it goes far enough, because really it's not Sam's story, is it? And
yeah.
Even if it was Sam's story, there's also the story of all the people who make Hobbiton work that we never hear about. Sam's value in this story is because he's connected to Frodo. So, but that's not actually what makes a society function. And so when we're building secondary worlds, I think there's a tendency to follow in the footsteps of these hero following, follow. Sitting on the shoulders of heroes, but that's not what's going to make your society tick, because I think fundamentally we end up with this illusion that all cultures are similar, because if we look at hero stories do function in very similar ways.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of the reasons why in my book I have the different caste levels, and everybody thinks they're the most important because of this particular thing that they do, that without which the society would fall apart.
I think. Sorry.
Well, but I mean, because societies are complex and there's a lot going on.
I think people tend to forget that they are complex. First, that we're a social animal, that you have to have other people around. I mean, yes, there are degrees of how much being around people you can stand. But this own bootstraps, self-made survival on their own thing is crap. And a complex civilization is so many moving parts, and they're all important to one degree or another. And if you pull one part, it's not going to work as well. And people forget that that's the case, that it takes, an enormous team to make a civilization work.
So one of the reasons why I think it will be interesting to see as more and more stories are being translated, what other cultures are doing, because I'm sort of thinking about the difference between the Japanese story of Miyamoto Musashi, which is a story of a wild child who was rehabilitated and turned into a pillar of community, as opposed to, say, sort of like Davy Crockett stories that we really loved at one point in Americana, which is, you know, out in the wild frontier, and it's very much not about being part of society. And there's a twisted way to read the Davy Crockett story where, you know, he's free and out there until he goes to the Alamo and he's with other people, and now he's wound up in other people's drama and now he's dead. So, I don't think that's how you're supposed to read that story, but I think that we do have a lot of this outsider story, and I'm gonna bring this back to Tolkien again because we're discussing genre, and you know, here we have Aragorn, who's been outside of society and all this time, and now he's going to tromp up and be king. And it's not because he's been out amongst the people and learned the ways of people and is going to understand people and thus be a good ruler. It's because he's destined, as opposed to other characters who actually have been sort of observing how society works, and they don't get to be the big showy stars. So we do have this trope, but it's very, very focused on disruption and is not about the community. But there are other cultural tropes that are all about the wayward person who gets brought back into the culture. So I think it's a question of what we expect as opposed to what humans are necessarily drawn to and ordinarily do.
I see what you mean. I mean, the whole American frontier myth kind of infuses the way we think about society, and it comes through in American fiction. Now I'm wondering how different British fantasy is versus American fantasy in coming to terms with that. I mean, you brought up Aragorn, but Aragorn's right to rule is right not because he was among the people, as you said, it's because he has the blood of Numenor in him. It's divine right of kings all over again, which sounds very Western European. Whereas if you threw Aragorn into the Wild West, he'd be the wild gunslinger, becomes sheriff because he's good with a gun. There's an image.
Well, okay, so I know this is going to sound like I'm suddenly taking a left turn, but we haven't yet talked about the power of violence. We sort of maybe gestured at it slightly with our discussion of feudalism earlier, but so there's monetary power, and then there's a power to be violent and force people to do your bidding in that way. I don't know. I think it's worth. I think it's worth just setting that out there and saying, okay, well, this is another form of power that we have to kind of examine.
I don't think we have any instances purely of muscle or of weaponry actually leading to effective power, except where it's coupled with either guile or charm or some way of getting other people to work with you, because any one person can be overcome by a concerted effort of a group of other people, right? Ordinarily. Unless there's something that's really drastically changing the balance, like extraordinarily overpowered weaponry in comparison. But, you know, even those people have to sleep. And so really it's about making sure that you are charming or effective or abusive or whatever it is enough to persuade other people to watch you while you're sleeping.
Yeah.
And to protect you instead of killing you. So we talked about might makes right and power and you know, strong arm tactics, but really if we look at this and we examine it, it's never the strongest guy, because that guy is the bodyguard or the enforcer for the one who knows how to get things done and how to pull the puppet strings.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of power in language too.
How do you mean, Juliet?
Well, I'm sort of I'm sort of riffing off of Kat's talking about persuading somebody to protect you while you're sleeping. That form of persuasion. And there are people who don't have physical power who have a persuasive power who manage to go very, very far.
The power of oratory.
Right.
And there's two ways for that to play out. One is you persuade someone to watch you while you're sleeping without promising to watch out for them while they're sleeping.
Oh, yeah. Is it
a contract where you agree to watch each other's backs?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
Mutual protection societies are really effective on a small scale, but they don't tend to you can't really make them much larger, right? Because you have to enforce this circle of trust.
Yep, I was
trust each other equally, and there can't be a sense of rivalry going on.
Like NATO, for example, there are tensions within NATO because NATO is basically a mutual protection society on a continental scale, and it worked well when there was the Warsaw Pact. But now, after that Cold War paradigm's gone away, now you start to see tensions within NATO, especially very, very recently. But even before then, I mean, Turkey, France, other NATO countries, although they're ostensibly supposed to all protect each other, there's still rivalries in there.
So the traditional thing is to have alliances that are very bound and say, well, this is when we come to each other's aid, and otherwise we're free to just live our own lives. And then there are very, very tightly interknit communities that form. And so there's a difference between NATO and the EU, right? Or a town.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of roughly saying a town, not just about size, but about how it functions, because the EU is still a confederation. Whereas in theory, a town is like one unit of many.
Yeah.
Well, something a town has, and partly it's got to do with scale and size, is that it's a relatively small geographical area. So the people who are part of that system are dealing with, if not exactly the same issues and needs, an overlap, and close enough to the other people that they recognize or can recognize what the other people are dealing with and how things have to go together. Well, that things have to work together. And the bigger the system, particularly geographically, the more different kinds of situations you are trying to make fit together. And the harder it is for people to see what is going on with other people and to value, respect their position and their needs.
I really wish we had a Sims expert on hand, because I really want to know how that particular second world building handled who's valued and who's not.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I couldn't answer it though.
No.
Well, I mean, so when we're talking about creating secondary worlds or fantasy scenarios, it's easy for us to try to take a sort of working model from an existing period of history or society and kind of try to transpose it into the fictional arena. But where do we, where do we push on the system to make it different?
Yeah.
I mean, I had a group of aliens that thought art was more important than anything else.
Well, your aliens probably would have really loved a certain era of feudal demand.
Yeah.
I mean, can you write beautiful poetry? Can you discuss the abstruse details of various forms of incense? I mean, this is a very, very specific and culturally designated form of prestige there.
Mm-hmm.
You have can you extemporaneously write poems?
Yeah.
Can you suddenly sing a song? I mean, I think that in the ways that we have achieved a certain globalization of certain kinds of culture, we've lost the idea of the various other ways we can value things. I mean, in genre fiction community, we actually have, for instance, potlatch, which is taking from an older native tradition of who can give away stuff as a measure of value. And that's not the thing that we think of these days. And in losing that, we have lost our tie between prosperity and charity and the prestige of charity. And we suddenly, from my viewpoint, in the 80s and 90s started saying, oh no, it's fine to be greedy. Here's your golden toilet. Instead of laughing about your gilded toilet, we're going to go, ooh, look at that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting to me because I remember getting a much more revolutionary education about opulence and being told, oh, look at the excesses of the Sun Kings era and how that leads to revolution because that's just excessive and we must be restrained. And so, there are very different ways of valuing these things and assigning what is allowable in showing your value and must you hide it.
And what society looks for. I mean, look at that TV show, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, where showing off the excess of the rich was the point of the show. In early eras, that would be gauche at best, if not actively seen as a bad thing. Like, why are you flaunting your wealth? That's not the thing rich and noble people should do. You're doing it wrong. Whereas now it's kind of our society
Well, yeah. So yeah, this is related to this question of old money and new money, I think.
Yes.
That there was a certain set of behaviors expected of people who had money, and if you didn't conform to those, then you weren't the right sort, even if you were rich, right?
Yeah, the nouveau riche idea. Like, oh yeah, they just have money. They have no style, no culture, no breeding, which is which goes back to the whole bloodline thing.
Yeah. But these are the tensions, I think.
Oh, definitely.
Because there is a lot of clout in that in that simple, I have lots of money and therefore can buy lots of things with it kind of power. And so then you end up with this tension between, well, maybe we don't have a whole lot of money. And this is stuff that occurred in European society, right? Where nobles started not having the money that they used to have. And then they were resentful of the people who came in and had money because of, for example, being a merchant or other sources, right?
So, right, we can talk about sumptuary laws, but I'm thinking, oh yes, look, we've come right back around to nobility because we have nobles selling off their daughters for money.
Yeah.
Your family can have a noble title because you put a cash infusion that will allow us to keep our humongous estate running.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because again, we have money does not buy you social prestige, which does not buy you power. It just buys you things. and yet, and then we have all these stories about being genteelly impoverished. And how much power do you really have if you can't buy anything and you're really worried about starving?
Yep.
Whereas in America, you get the Gilded Age and you get these rich people basically trying to become noble families because they're not necessarily marrying into a European tradition because there is no such tradition in America. They're basically trying to, the Vanderbilts and the J.J. Hills and the like are basically trying to create that out of nothing and become noble families just on the backs of their wealth, basically trying to forge a nobility out of money.
Yeah.
Well, I think that money is so highly valued is kind of, I think like how that's valued sort of also tells you who is valued, like whether you got it or not.
Yeah. Who has money? But I mean, so, and then there are also other forms of resources, right? So if you control a resource, but you don't have a lot of money, how does that play out in your perceived societal role?
I suddenly want to talk about Wesley Crusher and who's valuing Wesley and who's not.
Yeah.
Well, go for it. Why not?
Well, I mean, really, it's interesting, and I want to kind of look at it in story and also in the meta of how the fans are reacting to it, right? Because there's the fanish end of the fans are saying, yes, you want us to value this character, but we don't actually. And then some other fans are going, no, we do. But, who's identified with, who actually has power in the hierarchical structure of what's being presented on the screen versus who actually has, Bill Shatner, the power in deciding what's happening at the production point. And these are all things that we could just look at the end product, but I think it's interesting if we're doing secondary worlds to look at how do you decide which of your characters are actually pulling the strings and which ones are actually being pulled and don't know it. And which ones are frustrated because they think they should. And then I end up going, I really want to pull something out of Pratchett, but then Pratchett has such a beautiful display of, he's actually got a ruler who has all the power and a considerable amount of money. And really, what is Vetinari lacking? I don't know.
Probably the smartest man in Discworld.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't speak to it.
I mean, Vetinari is a tentpole of that universe because he does have money, power, authority, and we don't get to see a lot from his point of view. We only get to see him generally, with very, very few exceptions, on how other people see him, mainly like, say, Captain Vimes, for example. So we don't get to see inside his head too much to actually know what does Lord Vetinari really, really, really want. We don't know because we don't get to see inside his head enough to find out.
I think he wants things to work. I honestly do. I just watched Going Postal, and I think he just wants things to work. And I'm not sure that he cares how they work, just as long as they do. But that's a weird character motivation.
Yeah, that's a little abstract. Like, I want.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I have a character who's motivated mostly by his desire to have everything work the way it's supposed to and conform to his idea of how things are supposed to be, like how things are defined. Well, you're not acting as in a way that's consistent with how your role has been defined, so you're a problem, right?
I don't think that's a weird motivation at all. There are a lot of people who are very, very concerned when things are disordered in their lives, right?
And absolutely.
At various levels of disorder. So I think that's a perfectly reasonable way of looking at what does this character want. And because really the question, I think, becomes what does the character lack?
Yeah.
What does the character lack and can they get it?
Good question.
And so I think this is how we end up with, wow, I think Vetinari actually sort of wants to figure out how to set it all in motion so that he can just sit back. So I think we have sort of a city ruler as clockmaker. He's always having to tinker with the mechanism to get it to flow smoothly.
Yeah.
But he wants to wind it up and let it run, but he has to keep fixing it. And I think that both keeps him in a job and also frustrates him because the gears never run smoothly. For long, anyway.
Interesting. Well, it became 5 o'clock.
Oh crap! It did.
And then this is why he values Vimes, right? Because Vimes is the one who can keep it functioning as much as possible for him.
He acts as his hands basically to get the clock back to rights.
Cool. Well, that was very interesting. I know it was a challenging topic, but thank you guys for taking it on. Kat, you did Herculean work today. So Worldcon is coming up this weekend, and that's going to be super fun. There will be a dive into world building party. They still haven't told me what the room number is, so I'm going to be blasting that out on social media and putting it on flyers as soon as I know. But there will be taiyaki.
There will be what?
For, Julia?
Sorry?
When are you planning it for?
It's a dive into world building party, and we are going to have
during the evenings, or
it's going to be on Sunday the 19th from 4 till 6.
Okay.
Like a tea time party. There will be tea. There will be fish-shaped cakes.
Remember if my reading coincides with that or not, but it's only 30 minutes, so I will show up.
Well, if you can come for part of it, you can come for part of it, and I am going to be making many taiyaki.
Yay! Yum.
Yeah, because they are fish-shaped cakes.
Yes, I am trying to think about if I can manage to get butter mochi there, but I think it's
that might
probably
be
tight because I'm still packing and I'm leaving.
I understand, and that is okay.
Thursday morning at dark. Did you really buy tickets for this hour? So.
Yes, I'm trying mostly to demand foodstuffs from people who are nearby so that I'm not putting people under a terrible amount of pressure. But we're also going to have some fun readings of food related stuff. I think cool. I'm hoping Ann Leckie is going to read. She said she would come by, and yeah, and I think, gosh, I can. My brain is blanking because I'm having a hard time keeping all of its threads available to my mouth. But we have some interesting people coming, and it will be fun. So in any case, I hope you can make it. I also spoke today, and we're going to have an author guest on August 27th. Mimi Mondal is going to come on the show.
Oh, nice.
And so that should be really cool. Anyway,
we should have Mimi talk about food too.
Next week, I think we are going to talk about, where did I put it? Concepts of time. So
we already talked about clocks.
Well, I know. We just have to branch out. Anyway, thank you all for being here, and I'm going to stop the broadcast.